Awesome. Well, welcome to Voices of Valor. I'm sitting here today with Bob Alejo. Just finished his 17th year as a strength coach within the MLB, along with his decades of experience. Absolute legend within the strength industry. So I'm excited to have you here, Bob.
Well, you're kind with your words. Oftentimes, legends means he's old and he's been there a long time, and all that's true. But at the same time, I'm still flattered to hear that. I hope I've impacted some of the places I've been in for sure.
Absolutely. How was it with the Angels?
It was great. It was a new role for me, and after some 30 plus years in a row being an administrator, an associate AD, a director and a head strength and conditioning coach. I was an assistant this year to Dylan Centula, who's a really, really good young strength coach, and somebody that comes in that young and uh, typically has a lot cut out for them, and he grabbed
Right.
onto it and broke that Bronco for sure. So it was good and was around people that were familiar to me. So in many ways, it was like a reunion of sorts every time I went to another ballpark and saw people I hadn't seen. So I'd been out of Major League Baseball for 13 years. So it was refreshing in a lot of ways and challenging in others to take on that role just out of, my typical habitual process every day. I had to really reignite a whole nother stream of consciousness, to do that.
Yeah.
And I know Dylan was patient with me and, we got through it. And I thought he's done a fantastic job, and we're as a department pretty damn good.
For sure, yeah. I mean, you're probably excited to, after spending all those years as a strength and conditioning coach, then an administrator to actually like get back on the floor, right?
A little bit, yeah. Look, I think my skill now is as a leader. As I ran the high performance program when I was at California State University Northridge, which is to say I had oversight over all the performance units, nutrition, sports medicine, strength and conditioning, and then tapped into made sport and clinical psychology a big part of what we did, as we found out that was really important during COVID, where I was the COVID coordinator and the liaison to the president's office. So, there was almost a whole year where I was the only other person on campus aside from coaches and kids. Um, but it was good to see what's going on these days and how players are handling that part of their preparation and what organizations think about it. But I think more importantly is prior to that, you know, uh, I didn't get my contract renewed at CSUN, and so there was a 7 month period there where I was unemployed before I jumped on with Dynamic. So I also got to see a very interesting and uncomfortable side of the hiring processes that are happening not just in baseball but all through athletics. And I don't have any good reviews, let's just say, about how that's going on. I'd like to think I was the only one, like we do it sometimes, because at the same time, misery loves company, and I was hoping that nobody had to endure some of the things that I did. But I found out there's lots of people where that was going through at different ages, where the processes today just there's no etiquette to them, and there's no rhyme and reason oftentimes, and that's kind of sad. So
We're just saying like people not getting back to you.
yeah, well, I think that's the prevailing that's the prevailing hiring process now, right? Not getting back to people, not communicating, being uh, less than upfront with what's going on, and again, that wasn't just me, although my profile is a little bit unique to most of the people that are out looking for jobs these days, right?
For
Um,
sure, yeah.
I just found it underwhelming. I think I found it that leadership was trying to shy away from having the difficult discussions when really leadership includes that. It's not one where you can just say, "Well, I'm the boss. I don't have to call anybody back." That's far from leadership. And
Absolutely, yeah.
and as I'll be talking sooner, I years 7 years ago I wrote an article, how to fix strength and conditioning. There was a time, and I'm going to rewrite that article. Looks like there's some interest in seeing that rewritten, and things have changed now. But really, the prevailing thought behind all of that, Evan, is bad leadership. What we see
Mm.
down at the underneath all that is the symptom of a bigger problem, and the bigger problem is bad leadership.
Yeah, well, I mean, at least the Angels have their head on, screwed on straight,
Well,
picking you
I,
up.
I gave them all the thanks I could, and it was heartfelt and warming to know that Perry Manazian, the GM, Mike Frostad, the athletic trainer, and Dylan Satula, all, as I put in the LinkedIn post uh, Monday morning, that they somehow realized that I didn't magically lose my skills just because I'm 67 years old. And they've kind of got some people on board there too in the baseball in the dugout that are a little bit older and with a good mix of younger kids. So not to say that somebody younger couldn't do the job, but I think if you look around the industry, there is some sort of artificial ceiling of age for strength and conditioning coaches. When you look on the bench in the NFL, if you look on the field, in the dugout in MLB, and the bench in the NBA, I mean, there's got to be head coaches, and while everybody combined, there's probably 50 head coaches that are over 50, and probably half of those guys are over 60. But all of a sudden, in strength and conditioning, it's some sort of, it's not even a hurdle, it's a wall.
Well, I have a question for you that I
Yeah,
think a lot of people would be curious to hear your take on. Um, a lot of our listeners, not all of them are within even sports, because we
sure.
have a lot of listeners just within technology and whatnot.
Yeah,
Like, what is a strength and conditioning coach at its like basic level? At when you get to MLB colleges, because it's not just telling people to lift weights or giving them a program, right? Because AI can do that at this point.
yeah, right. And I think you're right there. Well, and that's been my evolution as well, right? Well, I mean, so strength and conditioning is just that. It's strength. They've kind of that kind of happened. It was strength coach first, and then it became strength and conditioning coach, and now it's athletic performance, which I actually prefer um, these days because it's a broader, more accurate term. But it's just handling the for me, let me just put it in my own terms. My
Hmm.
job is to make our players run faster and jump higher. And the physiology, as you know, underneath uh, those two versions of movement is really overwhelming at times, right? So that means you got to get strong. That means you got to be fast. Means you have to, and being strong and fast means you can change direction. And strong and fast means you have the underpinnings for conditioning in either direction, either high intensity interval, maybe some distance running. At some point, there is a level of strength necessary to run distances too and be healthy. And of
Hmm.
course, you don't have to talk about, injury prevention, which is number one, a lie. You can't prevent injuries. That's impossible. Injury mitigation. But, there is no such thing as an injury mitigation program. The injury mitigation program is good training. That's what it is. And
Yeah.
there's nothing special about all that stuff, right? And as Valor knows, um, when you're looking at movement, you've got to have some baseline information, and that baseline information is not just um, strength. It's not just speed. There's all kinds of things to look at, and so that's strength and conditioning coach these days has to know, in my opinion, all that stuff. He has to be very privy to nutrition, very privy to rehab, very privy to athletic training, physical therapy methods, all these things, recovery
For sure.
methods to
You've
be
probably seen it.
included.
You've probably seen a change from when you were at with athletics, spending
Yeah,
out just based on your profile, like most of your time within the MLB with them, and then now coming to the Angels. Like I'm sure the job description's changed a little bit.
well, I mean, I think the reason why I was called strength coach in the beginning is because really that was what the emphasis was, getting strong, and then conditioning was part of what you did, but you never really put that as an expertise that you had. Later on, we know that there's you know that's an important part of preparation for sport as well as injury mitigation. So that started to expand a little bit. But back when I was at UCLA in '84, we didn't do any rehabilitation. The player was brought to us when he was full go ready or she was full go and ready to play in a game. And then that kind of evolved a little bit, you know. So we, thankfully, because I think it's obviously important. But yeah, you know, when I started with the A's, I was just taking everything I did at UCLA at the time and put it in there because really, you know, when you think about it, there's no such thing as sport specific weightlifting, right? I think the conditioning part is what's specific to sport, and to be physically prepared to get into your sport is much wider than lifting weights. And I think if that's your focus uh, and what you think you're going to build your athletes into to prepare, you're gonna make a big mistake.
Absolutely. Well, no, I'm sure one difference has got to be all these sports tech companies and tools out there. Like, how do you differentiate between what's noise and then what you should implement as a coach?
For me, I just tell everybody like you just have to rely on the science. I mean, you know everything else is kind of white noise until you get down to the science. And, you know, and the science is pretty damn accurate, and it's there's enough subject size and to be able to say, hey, this is a pretty good chance that this is the thing that works the best, you know, because lots of things work, right? But what works best is what you got to get at. And so I think the technology is fantastic. I've always been somebody that wants to get conclusiveness. And
Hmm.
what the tech does is it brings you closer to conclusion. Now, it's difficult sometimes to get 100 out of 100 people to respond exactly the same, but that doesn't mean they all are going to uh, the outcomes aren't going to be all positive. They're all going to be positive to varying degrees. So in that case, it still is more conclusive than not. But I think the bottom line is the science. You know, you can't have your own science. It's already there, and people who you know, and plenty of people, as you know, either publicly or on the internet or whatever, you know, have their own science. They're just making stuff up. There's just no basis, no evidentiary material that tells us that what they're saying is true.
It needs
And you know,
needs third party validation.
yeah, you got to get somebody else involved. You know, something that and the party validation is typically science. So it's really kind of funny to think that the third party they think, oh, we need somebody else in here. Well, not just somebody that can validate it. You know, and so that's the important part. But I love the technology. I mean, I'm not one of the, you know, look, guys my age, if they're still in it, and I don't think anybody has been in it at this level that and age that I am, but they get to that whole, we don't need the tech, you know, I can tell just by looking, and I'm saying, you know, I get pushed into a corner sometimes about what I've done in the past and my skills and expertise. I would tell them, look, uh, I can't see it, and so if I can't see it, I know you can't see it. That's why I got the technology.
Yeah. It's like if Bob Alejo says the technology has a place, you should listen. Well, that's
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always willing to listen. I think a proper skeptic will remain skeptical until he proves that his theories are uh, not validated and there's a new, better way to do it. And then they change their mind. That's a true skeptic. It's better. Cynicism doesn't have any place in, you know, athletic performance or human performance for that matter.
yeah. You mentioned getting baselines as like one sort of thing. Um, from what I've seen, not necessarily all strength coaches do get baselines in regards to mobility or force plates or something like that. Maybe it's just the weight that they're working with. Like, what do you think some of the benefits are from getting baselines?
Well, I think what you're talking about is discussing a little bit about return to play, right? I mean, that's what we looked at. And frankly, of all the testing I've done over my 40 plus years, 42 years of coaching, I now know that the most valuable information with testing is baseline information for return to play. It's not, oh, our average squat goes up and all that. I mean, that's important. Of course, that would just be tracking. But in the end, the most important part is when somebody ends up becoming modified, limited, or injured, then that information is really super important. So I just think that to have good numbers leads you to continually making progress, and if something happens, you can always call on that. I mean, look, we do that all the time normally, with other stuff, right? Football plays that have certain metrics to it, or basketball shots, how far you shoot, percentages, and all that. We rely on that heavily. And then all of a sudden, you talk to people about baseline metrics. Hey, let's do some testing Oh no, we don't want to hurt anybody. Like, oh, I don't think that's necessary. And that's absurd.
Yeah,
I
they just
mean,
won't take the time to do it.
yeah, it really is. It really is an absurd notion not to get baseline testing of some sort. I mean, again, going back to run faster and jump higher, if you could just get a vertical jump in there, that should tell you a lot, right? And it doesn't take that much time. And if somebody gets hurt vertical jumping, then they aren't ready to play anyway. So people make it a big deal, like, oh, so and so pulled a hamstring in that sprint test. Well, he's going to pull it somewhere, isn't he? You're not going to ask him to go full speed somewhere in a game or practice. It's ridiculous. Better now
Yeah,
than later. But yeah, I think return to play has kind of been a bigger focus. But when I say return to play, people, I'm not sure they have protocols, just like you're saying. They just work out somebody until they look like they're better, and they say they're better, and then they put them out there.
yeah, and I mean, of course, I'm my typical conversation with a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, of course, is to talk a little bit about Valor. So
Yes.
oftentimes I also hear that, oh, that's the medical staff's kind of job. That's like not mine.
Wow. Wow. Well,
Of course, I'm
that's
coming
dis-
to you kind of the complaints box and try to get an answer, leading the
well,
witness
that's
a little,
that's
maybe.
yeah, that's disheartening, but not surprising. Again, I mean, I think strength coaches lock them into the weight room, into that that kind of bubble. You can't do
Hmm.
that if you're to get the best. That's why I'm a huge proponent of the high performance model, which I ran at CSUN and have written some papers on and publicly spoke. And Matt Teenan and I put together a uh, a paper that was published in the Athletic Training Journal about the two big models and pluses and minuses and what should be done. And you got to talk with everybody. Physical performance is a big deal, and by that I mean health, right? And so if that's how your best players continue to play, and those players get their numbers, and if you got the right players, then you're better than the other team. That's all drafting and all that too. But I mean, it's a little sad to hear somebody thinking, well, that's medical. That's not medical. That's siloed. That means those guys, they don't talk to each other. They don't share they
100%.
don't share information. And when you have messages and information and don't share it, you're probably not very good.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so you mentioned the high performance model. I'm
Mhm.
I'm familiar with it, but again, for our listeners, what would you define kind of as the high performance model, and why should people practice it if they are in a siloed environment?
Well, so first, the high performance model has no silos, although I'll say the medical model that has been used is a siloed model because it's all kept up on the medical side. So now what we're doing is, quote unquote, preventing disease instead of pushing performance. That there's two different things there, right? So typically, it's a little bit better now than it used to be. Typically said, hey, we want to have an injury prevention program. Well, it ends up being light bands and light resistance and being cautious. That's not the way to do it. And science proves that's not the way, because they say, oh, we have to be very careful. Well, if you're underloading, then that's going to promote injury too. So,
Right.
they've taken this whole tracking thing in the wrong direction. Oh, we're going to make sure we're not doing too much. How do you know you're not making sure you're not doing enough? I mean, that's ridiculous. That's the
Yeah.
body's meant to get loaded and then adapt with the right dosing of loads and intensities. So the high performance model is, so before they used to talk about, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. Well, those are silos. So what that is, it's a team of teams. The high performance model, the best one, is a transdisciplinary model where everybody's got the same information and they're sharing it all the time. So it's not a team of teams, it's one team. Doesn't mean athletic training doesn't do athletic training, but it also doesn't mean that athletic training can say, hey, strength and conditioning, perhaps that squat is X, Y, and Z, or those sprints, whatever it is. That's part of a collaborative effort. The other stuff's not collaborative. I don't believe the medical model is the best model. And I also don't believe that the ultimate candidate for that position is from the medical profession because they
Hmm.
don't work they don't work with coaches. They're not involved with coaches like the strength and conditioning coaches are. And we also cross pollinate with everybody. Where those other groups in a broken structure, they don't pollinate with anybody. They
Yeah.
just do their thing without saying, "Hey, we're going to go do this."
It
You
almost
know,
sounds like it almost sounds like the high performance model has, or at least is seeking to have the least amount of ego and titles involved.
yeah,
Preventing correct decisions from being made.
I think you're right. But look, I think the ego thing is a little bit overplayed too, Evan. I mean, in other words, I've also, of course, I've written and publicly stumped for this too. That I want my staff to have ego. I want them to be loaded with ego. That they walk into the room and they know the most about what they're doing. But I think the ego that people talk about now is that I'm so egotistical that I'm not going to listen to you. That's
Correct.
that's
Okay.
not ego. That's selfishness. That's whatever. I mean, if you walk into a room of high level physicians or high level mechanics or whatever, they all think they're the best guy. I want that.
Yeah.
But
You don't.
to
I
but
would
to
say
be
you
the
don't. You don't want to show up to your surgeon and them not be confident, right?
right, and at the same time, the reason why they're really good and think they're the best is because they're always asking. They always talk. What's the best out there? I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to be the last one to the party. What is the best way to do this now? And they just keep. And so it's not so much they just keep elevating themselves, is that they separate because these other guys they think they know too much or they don't care one way or another. But the silos are an embarrassing attempt to player health and welfare.
For sure. Yeah. And you've been kind of touching on that. Return to play rehabilitation has become an increasingly important role, or at least something strength and conditioning coaches, to your point, have to have knowledge and a hand in.
Hmm.
You referred to it as reconditioning.
Yeah,
What
I have.
what is like reconditioning versus kind of what a classical person thinks of as just straight rehab?
Well, I mean, you could talk about it one way or another. You're just reconditioning to the level that you were at primarily. So, but I also think that the return to play thing, and you and I have talked about this. I think the return to play moniker is a little misunderstood too. I mean, it doesn't mean that it can't be return to play, but it has to be a little better defined because the first thing
Yeah,
you do is not return to play. You return to movement, and then you return to load, and then you return to drills, and then you return to individual drills, then you return to group drills where now you have somebody else interacting with you. So let's say you're doing a dribbling drill in soccer. You're coming off of an ACL, which is common there. Now you're dribbling a ball. Okay, you're not going to first go into a rondo and start kicking balls and playing keep away with people on an ACL. You're going to first dribble a ball to see if you can. You'll do it up against a wall, kick it, kick it, kick it, and then you have somebody else come in. Now that drill goes to the next level, right? But that doesn't mean you're not in practice yet, right? You may be able to get into that one drill, but you're not going to get into the drill where they send the forwards down and launch the ball and you go to shoot, right?
yeah,
So it's return to play is I think there's a lot of stuff happening in there before they get on the field,
right.
and I just want folks to know that it's first of all return to movement, return to range of motion, return to sport like movement, loaded movements, is going on. We're starting to do resistance training too, because again, it's so sad that strength coaches say, well, we're not part of the return to play. Well, how are you measuring strength and their condition?
Hmm.
That's ridiculous. I mean, there should be something in there. My protocol would be, I need you to be at least at 90% of your strength testing, whatever it is, whatever test we strength, squat, deadlift, clean. I need 90%. Yeah, that's when you're starting to say, okay, now that's intense. That's game like getting close, which you can't really simulate a game in practice, but that's getting
Yeah,
close to where you're at. Or if you're a 30-inch vertical jumper, I'm not okaying you to go to the field until you at least jump 27 inches under
got it.
90%. So I mean, that's these things we've got. Look, we talk about data and tech all the time. We got all these numbers, and then I can't. There's so many people that don't use it. And I think for the most part, all the pro sports are guilty of it at some point or another. But that's ridiculous. I mean, and the loading is so important. It's one thing to get somebody back, but when you re-injure somebody, I mean, that's going to be likely the process that got them re-injured, not him. Like, oh wow, we did everything we could. I think you think that, yeah, probably, but
Well, is it fair to say? Well, I guess why do you think people aren't doing? Is it just come down to time, laziness, not understanding kind of the products? Which that goes both on the tech people, like myself included, and the coaches.
well, okay, so I wouldn't go that far, right? I mean, if you got equipment that, I mean, some tech is good. So like a Vertec, right? You know what a Vertec is, right? So you do it, jump on a
Hmm.
Vertec, and you're going to get a measurement, right? And it's going to be, it's not going to be exact versus a force plate where you can get height, but that's not going to be exact either because the guy could short jump it, and land really low and all. Still, you got to have some number. And so what you have to do is make sure you have standardized protocols, which every workplace should have, standard procedures, standard
SOPs.
care, and so, that when you squat, there's a standard protocol for squatting, whether it's strength training or rehab. So it becomes, that's either a squat or it's not. And then it moves to the next thing, right?
Hmm.
So I don't think it's time, but I would never blame the technology. And here's how I put it, right? We talk about injury rate, and I don't think anybody would disagree with me that we're not seeing a concomitant increase with the advent of technology and the technological advances, much like Valor has now gone, you know, to a higher level of how can I see testing procedures and data
Hmm.
much better than it was a year ago. Right? This thing's always evolving.
For sure.
So, whether you not have, so if you have a force plate in your testing and you're thinking you're not getting the right numbers, or you're just using a Vertex because you think that's good enough, well, you got to standardize it so that's reliable anyway. But at the same time, if you can purchase that Hawkins and you're thinking, or whatever, whatever force plate you're going to use, and you're thinking, no, 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 the Vertex good enough, I think you're making a mistake.
Yeah.
So to me, when I hear about all this injury stuff, I say, well, you guys talk about technology all the time. It's not the technology. So it's the practitioner. It's the guy that's running Valor. It's the guy that's running Catapult. That's the guy or the guys or the girls or the people that are running that they're making. It's human error. It's operator error. You're not interpreting the data. You're not gathering it correctly. Your interventions aren't right. It's that. So the way I say it is, it's like the tech today is like a toaster, right? So first of all, if you don't plug it in, it doesn't work at all,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't do anything. But when I do plug it in, it still doesn't do anything. I have to get the toast. I have to put the bread, put it in there, and I got to press the plunger. Like there's no technology that's so AI that it just walks out there and plugs itself into people. And, right? So again, practitioners always involved. But I think the answer to the question is when you burn the toast in the toaster, it's not the toaster's fault. It's your fault, right?
You
So
don't have enough. You don't have enough reps with the toaster.
Yeah, I'd put it all on the practitioners, frankly. I mean, I think that's why we got the injuries where we are. Otherwise, it's not like the technology's not evolving and it's great. It is.
Right.
But, people aren't digesting it correctly and then they're not spitting it out correctly either.
Well, I mean that's like a few things you said. Like our hope is that Valor does become the standard as far as evaluating mobility, evaluating change of direction, kind of anything movement related. And it is like one of those pieces of the puzzle that you do your force plate, you do your Valor assessment, it just adds, and then like you said, you can if you want to get really scientific and logical with it, it's like well they're not at least 90% of their Valor movement profile. They're at least not at 90% of their force plate. Now you're combining kinematics and kinetics.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think you're right, and then so then you have the additional versatility and other tertiary and secondary variables that makes the product better, right? So is there a better force plate than X? Could be, but can I pick your force plate up and take it to the baseball field and then pick it up and take it to the volleyball court? Can I? No. Okay, well then, as good as this thing is, in my setting, I can't get everybody in that room. Hey, Evan, you're going to jump at 10:30. Bob, you'll jump at 10:40, and then all of a sudden I'm taking a whole day, right? It's the same thing with Valor, right? It's on your phone. I can do it. I can do it. Hey, that doesn't look right, or I can say, hey, come on over here. Let's run a quick test. I got it all right here. Now, there's plenty of other stuff and labs and all the stuff that goes on there, but at the same time, uh, why wouldn't I just go, you know, take my phone and just pull it out and go, I'm going to take a look at this right now. So,
100%.
so that makes that product so much more viable. Is it the best biomechanics setup when you're in the lab? And well, certainly no, it's not. The sterile environment where you can dictate every damn thing is important. But if I can get a good idea, if I can get something that tells me that what I'm seeing is valid and reliable, I'm good with that.
100%. Gives you a good idea, it's quick, and practitioners like a strength conditioning coach can understand it, whether or not they think this
Yeah.
sort of stuff is in their job description.
Well, with Valor, the utility and mobility is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't opt for that if you had the opportunity. Um, Even if you had the greatest physiology lab in the world, you still got to take time out of whatever they're doing and walk them all in there and individually go, bam, 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 right? To me,
Yeah,
that just takes time. And all strength coaches talk about, oh, I got no time. I got no time. Okay, well, this will help you.
100%. Plus, like you said, taking as the athlete comes along in their return to X,
Mhm.
process, you want to sort of increase the chaos or game like scenarios. So now you can actually do something even on the field or practice field or turf
Right.
instead of just in the lab.
Well, yeah, and then so now you're talking about closed and open drills, right? So it's funny if you can, these guys with the deceleration and all that stuff kind of training. I think uh, I wouldn't say it's overrated, but they're making too much out of it. So what I mean is, in change of direction, if I see a cone, and this is going to relate to what you just said, I'd say, okay, sprint to the cone and then stop on the cone. Okay, well, you already have that. You already know where you're stopping. You already know how fast you can run, and you're going to stop right on. That never happens in a game, never. So that's not duplicating anything. But if you can watch him do that in a game or her in a game, I don't have to duplicate that. This is exactly what it takes for you to do that, right?
100%. Well, I know we're near our time, but I want to ask you, what do you think it is that separates you from 90% or so of the practitioners out there? Like for those that want to have a long, fulfilling career like you, like what does it really take?
Oh, well, you got to love it, first of all, and I do. I mean, it's fun for me, right? So that's one thing. It's just like anybody who stays in baseball for 20. You can't stay in baseball for 10, 15, 20 years and not like baseball. You like it.
Yeah,
I kind of have transitioned a little bit when I got into baseball in '93 with Oakland. It was all fun, and I was still throwing, and I was catching in the bullpen and hitting ground balls and all that, and as part of the team. But the strength and conditioning was really my focus. And now I know that it's the way I used to explain. I said, "Oh no, you're a baseball guy," and I said, "No, I'm not. I'm a strength coach that happens to be in baseball." Before I came here, I was a strength coach that had national championship soccer teams, national championship swim teams, football, bowl games. So now I'm just in baseball. So I love strength and conditioning. It's the job. It's not the sport for me. Um, Number one, I think the other part is that I have now I have a greater level of intuition because I've got more experience. And really, experience is being able to gather intuition. And intuition is not some magic thing, right? It's just when you see something, when I see something, it goes through my head 40 years at a time. Boom. So what I like to say is I don't have any theories anymore. I've got examples. That's different. So I don't have to worry about whether X, Y, and Z works or not. Now if it's something new, I can just base that on the thing that was right behind it. As these things evolve, there's nothing really earth shattering happening. It becomes a kind of an extension of the last thing that was there. Or like many of the things that I've seen and I've said before, when they say, "Hey, what'd you hear about this thing?" And they go with this long name or whatever. And I end up saying, "Well, if you tell me what it is, I'll tell you what we used to call it." Because there's not a whole lot of stuff how many versions of the bench press are there? One. And it's about 100 years old. So,
Hmm.
you know, so my intuition is better, which I think at somebody with my experience and the things that I've been able to accomplish. Um, Now I'm at the part where it's a little more artistic to write programs and lead and schedule versus just like this. Now this thing is kind of it's a whole, a mass, kind of gelling it together. So again, I think you got to have passion for it. And again, once you get to this level, it's intuition that you can't coach or teach. It just has to happen.
Right. Yeah. Pay your dues to get those mental models that you have today.
Right. Mental model. I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'm sure this will be the first of many. Eventually, we'll get to do in person. But where could people follow you if they want to, see some of the stuff you're publishing?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and shoot, I'm gonna have to look up. I don't even know what my Twitter thing is now that I think about it.
I think it's
Let's
like
see.
Coach Bob Alejo on Twitter or something.
Is it? Here, let me see. I don't know. Yeah, it's at Coach_Alejo on Twitter. I don't do much on Instagram, but I do on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is just my name, right?
Yes, sir.
So
Well, give Bob a follow. He's got a wealth of information. He loves sharing it with the world. So
yeah, come
appreciate you
on,
coming
hop
on,
on,
Bob.
and I'm usually on the social media. If I'm not promoting Valor, I'm definitely um, trying to stimulate thought and maybe pay it forward a little bit.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you.
Take care.